Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Health Mastery Show. As usual, and for the foreseeable future, I am your host, Adam MacDonald, and I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's listened to the first two episodes. We had a bit of technical issues in post-production in the last episode. Kind of sounded like myself and Lyle were trying to jump over each other and, try to get the last word in, but we weren't actually speaking over each other. It was just some issues, but nonetheless, I want to appreciate all the feedback, and I really appreciate that when people reach out to me and they give me topics or they just say what they liked or what they didn't like. So please continue to do that. In today's episode, I have Marty Kendall on, and I first heard Marty on another podcast. I think it was Sigma Nutrition Radio, and his message really resonated with me. So Marty is an engineer by day, and he's used some of his learnings and mindset and tools from engineering and brought them across to the nutrition industry by developing certain tools and algorithms to be able to help people optimize their nutrition. So Marty shares his learnings at something called optimizingnutrition.com, and he's built the nutrient optimizer, which focuses on things like satiety index, insulin index, and ultimately tries to get people better results by focusing on their health first. So trying to get them to eat better rather than just looking at everything as a nail and you have a hammer and then just getting these quick, fast results, but rather thinking about the long term. So his philosophy really resonated with me, and I really enjoyed this episode. So Marty, please introduce yourself and let me know how you got into this.
My wife is type 1 diabetic, so that's sort of where it all started. And getting married 18 months ago, I just sort of started living with the day-to-day reality of insulin and diabetes, and like there was a real challenge there of how can I manage that, how can I improve that and optimize it, and through pregnancies, and just really saw that how her life changed as she went through the pregnancies, and it was really important to be able to control her insulin, dial that in, and to optimize her blood sugars. And as I learnt more and more, I eventually came across a concept called the insulin load, which enabled me to quantify her insulin dosing better to match her food. And then through quantification of that, you're able to optimize your food choices to minimize insulin load to then stabilize her blood sugar. So that was really powerful and really exciting. But then sort of came across, realized that the lowest insulin load foods that generated the lowest insulin response were really high fat foods. That led me to nutrient density and saying, how can we optimize nutrient density and insulin load? And then more recently, I've come across the idea of satiety and managing satiety by our food choices, because a lot of us want to lose weight and strip muscle, but somebody who's an athlete needs to maximize the amount of energy that they can actually take in so they can perform more, and you can quantitatively optimize and dial in your satiety so you can actually eat more or less based on your food choices. So yeah, that's the overall concept, and the three pillars, I suppose: the insulin load, nutrient density, and satiety. And together I've sort of, as an engineer, developed a bit of a system that optimizes each of those based on your goal.
Yeah, that's great, and I really like the approach. We talked about it a little bit offline, that you're taking the engineering kind of approach and using your analytical brain and different kind of graphs and analytics and BI and stuff to really give people a visual kind of goal or a visual overview of how they can actually improve this stuff. Because some people are visual. I'm actually personally really visual. I learn by seeing things. So I really like the different kind of graphs and stuff. And I know there's loads of apps and stuff like that. We talked about that, but often they're kind of a little bit, they don't go too in depth into the nuances, which is something that I really like about your stuff. And just as a side note there, just talking about the insulin load, I guess a lot of people would focus on, they know what, energy density and, calories and satiety as well, hunger signals. People are pretty clued into that stuff, but not many people really focus on the insulin load.
Yeah.
And I guess you had to pay specific attention to that because of your wife's a diabetic, so that's obviously extremely important. And I was listening to a podcast with someone called Dr. Mike Israetel. He is quite recently, and he talked about, why do often like those big bodybuilders that are like, Olympia, why do they eat why do they often eat the same foods and they don't actually change in their diet? And something that most people would know, including myself, was that because of the different insulin loads within certain foods, even if you match the carbohydrates and match the calories, certain foods actually have different insulin responses. So if you're switching from one type of, let's say you're eating rice, white rice all the time, and you eat that 3 or 4 times a day, because these bodybuilders are actually taking super physiological doses of insulin as a, an anabolic agent, they can actually kill themselves if they eat too much of the wrong type of food. I won't say wrong type of food, but if they get a massive response from insulin, and it's some food for thought, because even though you might have, let's say, 100 grams of carbohydrates from X food, and you might have 100 grams from another food, everything else equal, the insulin response can be potentially quite different. So it's something that I'm definitely quite intrigued by, and want to look into a little bit more about that. So when you talk about those 3 pillars, how do you manage those? Is there certain things that you look at? Do you think that you should keep insulin load low, and have you found better success with that, or working with people, or how has that worked?
Yeah, I suppose for insulin load, it's mainly important for people with diabetes, and particularly those injecting insulin. And there's a lot of talk about the carb insulin hypothesis, and to a large extent for most people that's completely irrelevant, because if you're actually injecting insulin, like my wife or a bodybuilder who's trying to get really big, what that insulin does, it's like a brake on the liver that holds back all your energy. It's really anti-catabolic. It stops your muscle and your body fat breaking down, and then allows you to keep piling on the energy. So if you're injecting insulin as a type 1 diabetic, you inject too much, it won't allow your stored energy to be released into your bloodstream. So you really get hungry and you have to eat more. So that insulin does really generate more calorie intake. You end up eating more because of that insulin you've injected. But for most people, it's largely irrelevant. And, the carbs don't generate insulin. It's really the excess calories, because if you're eating a low satiety diet, you'll just end up eating more and more and more, and that raises insulin, which really just says, well, I've got heaps of energy coming in through your mouth, you don't need any more food or energy to be released from your stores, so you just you shut off your release of energy from your body until you use up all the food that's coming in from your mouth and in your bloodstream. So really the way to control insulin for the general population is just really to find a way to not eat so much, which is really what the satiety concept is about. And then nutrient density is really tightly related to satiety. And so really for most people, it's a matter of saying, well, what are you eating? What foods, what nutrients you're not getting enough of? And let's fine tune our diet to make sure you're getting the foods that give you more of those harder to find nutrients.
Yeah, I think there was a study done last year, I believe, out of Stanford University, I think by Gardner and colleagues, I can't remember, where they matched insulin, high carb versus low carb, and it was an isocaloric diet, so same calories, and over the course of a year in these otherwise healthy individuals, the weight loss was pretty much the same. But it's still something of interest to look into in terms of the way the insulin works. So as I suppose an opposite effect to glucagon, which helps release energy. If you're not able to release that energy, what kind of signals can that send to your brain? And then you being wanting to overeat, because if we match calories and if we're in a metabolic ward and we're very strict with our calories, then then that's fine. But often the case is that most people, even those who have, say, physique orientated goals or want better body composition, they're not necessarily always going to want to track their calories and every single thing every single day. So the reason that I found it really interesting to look at your work is because you're looking at all this different approach in terms of how we can actually maximize our nutrition, but looking at different things just outside of overall calories, just things like satiety, things like nutrient density. Because even myself, even though I'm tracking calories quite rigidly now because I'm doing a bodybuilding show coming up, when I'm not doing that, I just don't really like to track that often. But I don't want to get fat, so I want to make sure that I'm eating off based on my hunger signals that my body's sending me, because obviously they're like it's a natural characteristic of our bodies that's developed, and as we evolved. So we got to listen to those things.
Yeah, totally.
It's not just, as an engineer, you're very programmed, I guess, and you have that analytical mindset. But at the same time, we do obviously we're not computers, as you know, and we need to have emotion is involved, and we need to listen to our body's feedback. So that's why I think it's a great idea to kind of try and manipulate some of these things within our diet, so that we're not always trying to look at the spreadsheets, not always trying to use an app to tell us when to eat or what we can't eat. So if you could talk a little bit about your approach to then nutrient density in terms of the diet.
Yeah, so the concept of nutrient density is really fundamentally how many micronutrients have you got per calorie. So in a standard, say 2,000 calories per day, how many of those micronutrients you're covering off on. And MyFitnessPal will track a few micros and your macros, but we use Chronometer as an input into the nutrient optimizer, and Chronometer will track all your essential micronutrients. So we then get an output of that, dump it into the nutrient optimizer, and say, okay, you're getting tons of vitamin C, tons of vitamin K, tons of vitamin B12. You're a bodybuilder, so you're getting a crap ton of your amino acids, but hey, your vitamin D, your choline, your whatever those particular nutrients. Often it's the electrolytes like magnesium, potassium, calcium that people tend to not be getting enough of. How do we boost those? What foods contain more of those? That'll give you that better micronutrient profile. And we really find that when we dial that in, people's cravings come down, they're more satiated, they're able to control their appetite. And often a more nutrient-dense diet is also a lower energy density diet, so it's much more satiating, much more filling. And we did a trial with about 500 people, a bit of a free competition, where people put in $50 into the prize pool and tried to dial up the nutrient density. And as they improved the nutrient density, their cravings came down, the energy density of their diet changed, and they were just satiated. They were getting away with 1,000 calories or less and being really, really satisfied and losing a crap ton of weight really quickly, and really surprised. It's like, yeah, this is exactly how we designed it to be. So yeah, it does really work in practice, and we see it actually bear out when we do that. And you're talking about the Gardner, the Diet Fit study, where they basically started people on either extreme of low carb or low fat, and they found that when people really go to those extremes, it's really hard to overeat really low fat foods, and it's really hard to overeat low carb, higher protein foods. They're really satiating. Really, you've got the foods that we're getting summer and the foods we get in winter, and the foods we get in autumn are these combinations of carbs and fat together, the breast milk or the acorns or the nuts, so those sort of foods that really rarely happen, and our body really goes, hey, it must be autumn, I need to prepare for winter, so we go into this binge mode. So that's really the essence of the satiety formula. We got 500,000 days of data from MyFitnessPal, ran the numbers, and really found that protein gives a positive effect on satiety, energy density gives a positive effect on satiety, so the bulkier food is more satiating, more fiber is more satiating, but it's the combination of fat and carbs together in sort of an unnatural combination that rarely happens in nature naturally, that is really, really hyperpalatable and just seems to send this binge instinct to your body. So through the quantification of that, we're able to develop a formula to really say, okay, here's your food, what's your satiety index score of that food, and how likely is it to make you to overeat or undereat. And that's really powerful. And if you can just limit your food choices to those foods that have a lower satiety value, a higher on the satiety index, you're less likely to overeat, and you can manage your intake without having to really micromanage your, the weighing and measuring of your food to the nth degree.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting approach, which over the last couple of years I've been really looking into beyond the kind of the macros, because even though you can with this, say, quote unquote flexible dieting, and that's something that really opened my eyes when I found it maybe 10 years ago or something like that. If it fits your macros, or being able to just fit food into your diet, but essentially the energy balance equation. When I figured that out, I was like mesmerized, because I thought that you had to eat clean. There's actually one point in my life when this might have been about 9 years ago, where I hadn't eaten a biscuit or a cookie for like I think it was 6 months straight, and I was so proud of myself. But I binge often on other foods at the weekend, because I just couldn't control myself. But I hadn't eaten a biscuit, so I was pretty proud of myself. But I just didn't understand the fundamentals of nutrition. But with that being said, there is certain foods that I feel people should avoid, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this one. Totally. And it's not that everybody should avoid Reese's peanut butter cups, but I should avoid them because of these combinations that you talked about. And I know you're familiar with the work of Stefan Guillenet and the different food properties, like energy density. Yeah, and the main one really is the hyperpalatability. And because even though people know they can fit these certain foods into their diet, if they just reduce calories at the other points of the day, you can eat a Snickers bar, but the chances of you just eating 2 scoops of Ben and Jerry's ice cream are just not likely.
Yeah, and definitely it's peanut butter is a definite comfort food for me. And if I'm hungry, I've done my deadlifts, I'll come home, and as much as you go, no, I don't want to eat that, you find yourself face down in the peanut butter and cream and these energy dense foods that but you don't eat plain butter or drink plain oil by itself. It's those combination of fat and carbs together that really send you into that hyperpalatable overdrive. The donut is the fat and carbs together that is just really hyperpalatable, and really, as I said, doesn't occur in nature. It's these Franken modern foods that are typically highly processed and also very low nutrient density as well. And I suppose the good thing about if it fits your macros, they generally have about a minimum 25% protein compared to the typical population of 14 to 16% maybe protein or less on average. So you're starting from a place where you've got a fairly good satiety from that high level of protein to start with. But as you push protein up and get to one extreme or other of carbs and fat, you tend to get a much better satiety response. And by those quantitatively choosing your foods and optimizing your food choices, you can better control your the amount you take in without having to weigh and measure everything. And definitely calories in, calories out to a large extent is correct, but most of us don't live in a metabolic ward where all the food is weighed and measured for us.
Yeah, so it's not really the combination of these foods that make us fat per se, because you're eating carbs and fats together, where you're going to have an insulin response, and then the insulin response will then shuttle the fat into the fat cells, which is kind of a redundant overview or insight into what people actually think happens. And people say, well, you should spread them, but it's more so the fact that we tend to overeat them because of these food properties that drive us to overeat. And it's an innate characteristic of our ancestors, so that we could actually eat more food when we didn't actually have food, and when we found it, we'd binge on that food, and that's normal because we'd eat every couple of days probably. But now we have a cupboard full of delicious foods, so if you're always putting yourself in these positions, it's actually very difficult and stressful. So my actual approach to it is, even though I know I can eat certain foods, I don't buy them, because I will just overeat on them.
If they're in the cupboard, if they're in the fridge when you're hungry, especially if you're trying to diet and prep, you'll always eat them. And my wife, being type 1 diabetic, in January we had a weight loss challenge, and she was prioritizing these high satiety foods and meals, and it was really fascinating to see, because she was choosing the satiating foods, she had less calories, and her overall insulin requirement just plummeted at that trigger point as she switched from a normal diet to a really highly satiating diet. The insulin really followed the calories rather than the carbs driving insulin, which drives you to overeat. It's really the other way around, and people get the cart before the horse so much of the time with the whole carb insulin hypothesis.
Yeah, that's pretty intriguing to see that insulin levels or requirements drop because of focusing on these higher satiety foods.
Definitely.
It's something actually that I'm focusing on at the moment, simply because I'm eating pretty low calories. For those of you listening, I'm competing in about 3 weeks' time, so my calories are quite low, and I eat some weird combinations of foods, not because of my taste, but for example, I eat almost every day. I'm eating sugar-free Jello, like a bowl of it, and it's simply for those brain signals, for to fill my gut up with really low energy density food but high food volume, so that I'm not hungry, so I'm not thinking about food all the time. I put egg whites in my oats, which sounds absolutely disgusting, and to be honest, it isn't that good. And yeah, it's not great. Sometimes even courgettes or zucchini, whatever you want to call it, there ends up being like more vegetables in my oats and more egg whites in my oats than actual oats. And I cook the crap out of them for like 20 minutes before I eat them, and it ends up being like pretty low calories, but I'm not as hungry if I just eaten oats. So you do some, but I mean, when you do focus on these things like satiety, less palatability, more suppose simple ingredient foods, even though that's not a requirement for fat loss, or it's not a requirement for body composition, it does help you not go crazy and maintain the goal. And obviously adherence to a certain calorie goal or calorie band is going to be the thing that drives your body weight, up or down.
Yeah, they talk about sensory specific satiety, and it's the fact that the foods taste amazing and varied, and you've got the spicy and the salty and the sweet all together just send you into this hyperpalatable overdrive, and you eat more naturally. So the ultimate really question for me is, how do we manipulate our diet, not to be completely boring, bland and flavorless, but to make it so that we enjoy the food we have. Nutrient dense food is full of flavor. Really, nutrients send taste signals that light our brain up and reinforce us to eat those foods. But how do we make it sustainable, so it's healthy and will naturally lead us through our food choices to eat less?
Yeah, and what do you think is going on there when we crave, or let's say we're eating a lot of food, they'll eat a lot of, say, fatty tasting foods or umami, and then you'll switch to something sugary and you'll eat as much as you want there, and then you'll switch back. I had an experience when I was like 19 or so. I lived in Canada for like 6 months, and it was the first time, and probably one of the last times actually, that I tried smoked weed. And it's legal now. It was kind of grey area back then, but anyway, that's for a different discussion. But yeah, so
you can talk to the police about that.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're gonna arrest you for something that you did many years ago. Well, actually, maybe they will. But
anyway, moving on.
Yeah. So I basically got the munchies, and I sat there with like 1 kilo of peanut butter, but also these sweet. They were like sweets, or like these sugary kind of jelly things, and I would eat like a lot of the peanut butter, but then I would get sick of it, and then I would eat a lot of the sugary stuff, but then I would get sick of it. But if I kept switching between the two, I was able to consume which is a great feat, but I felt like absolute crap afterwards.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Yeah, I think alcohol is potentially like they talk about the protein leverage hypothesis. Alcohol is even further up the oxidative priority chain, so you have to burn that off quickly, get really hot, and you have to oxidize it straight away. So I think potentially alcohol in and of itself is going to be very satiating, but it reduces your inhibition, so that primal urge comes out and goes, oh, the cookies, the peanut butter, the ice cream. Yeah. Oh yeah, I did have that thing in the back of the fridge that I forgot about. Let's go for that too.
Yeah, I don't think telling someone to drink more alcohol is the best fat loss approach.
No, because it just no one.
Yeah, I think that because alcohol is because it's almost like a poison to the body, or like a foreign substance, our body needs to oxidize that. And I actually do personally, when I drink alcohol, the next day my face is so red, my blood pressure is through the roof, and my heart just is pounding. My body obviously just doesn't like it as much as some other people. My mind likes it. I mean, I like to drink it, but my body isn't the biggest fan of it.
Yeah,
but I want to
it just has to get rid of from the system really quickly. It's basically jet fuel for your body.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah, I wanted to get into your thoughts, Marty, on optimizing your nutrient density, so your vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients for body composition. So
Yep.
how do you think that would play a part? And then your thoughts on recommended daily allowances, RDAs, versus what we should intake, or would intake for optimal health, and not just getting in the bare minimum.
Yeah, I've been doing a real interesting deep dive into all the micronutrients, doing a series on the blog about the functions of all the different vitamins and minerals and amino acids and fatty acids. And it's really fascinating. And they're all wound up in being able to oxidize and use all your fuels effectively. And they're all interrelated. And especially your B vitamins drive your ability to effectively and efficiently your mitochondria to burn the food you eat, the carbs, the fat, the protein, to actually use them for fuel. So in that regard, if you're a performance athlete, if you're in the gym, if you want to lift heavier weights, if you want to run faster, those nutrients are completely critical. And I think to a degree, we talk about the protein leverage hypothesis. I think there's a similar nutrient leverage hypothesis where we keep on eating food until we get the nutrients we need. We crave food. You hear about pregnant women who crave chocolate or some weird thing, or even dirt, to get the nutrients they need. They go crazy for pickles or whatever is at that particular point in time. And I think our body, without us really knowing, is craving those nutrients, and we keep on eating more. So if we prioritize the foods that have more of those nutrients, we just tend to be more satiated. And I've got about 25,000 days of data in the nutrient optimizer that people have uploaded from Chronometer, and going through all that, the nutrient that is particularly satiating, that it must be just that people typically don't eat enough of it in their diet, is potassium. There's a really strong satiety response to more potassium, so that the recommended daily intake is 4.7 grams per day. Very few people achieve that, but if you're up around 6 grams a day from food, the satiety response is really amazing, and people eat less. And you see the same thing again and again for all the different nutrients, for magnesium and folate and the B vitamins, that if you eat foods that contain more of those per calorie, people just tend to eat less. So we've managed to use that data to quantify it again, to make a bit of a updated satiety formula that not only uses the macronutrients but also the micronutrients, so you can identify the foods that, based on the micronutrient content, will enable you to eat less.
And Marty, do you have certain, so you talk about all these micronutrients of potassium, magnesium, etc.
Yep.
What is your philosophy on actual nutrition? Do you have certain foods or a certain way of eating that you feel is best to get these? Is it what's your approach? Is it lower carb, higher carb, no vegetables, a lot of vegetables?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really diet agnostic, and I suppose that's the really exciting thing about the nutrient optimizer and looking in terms of nutrient density. Is it really cuts through the bullshit of nutrition, because so much of our food is just flavored and colored to make it look like it contains nutrition. But typically the one thing that all this focus on nutrient density excludes is the refined, really heavily processed grains and oils. So most of our diet these days is based around refined grains of some sort combined with refined vegetable oil, which just sends us into this, hyperpalatable feeding frenzy, and we buy more, we eat more. And these foods are really cheap to produce, they're really low protein, and we don't know how many calories we're consuming because they just go down so easily. So that's the thing that really gets pushed out. I see benefits in a carnivore approach, I see benefits in a plant-based, vegan type approach, but really the optimal approach tends to have some combination of non-starchy veggies with plenty of seafood and meat, and really it depends on what your current diet is to what foods tend to be need to be optimized for you at that point in time. So I've developed a whole lot of different food lists that say, if this is your goal, then these are the foods that are going to be more appropriate for you. But then we use the nutrient optimizer and then chronometer to say what are you currently eating and which foods will help you plug those nutrient gaps.
So what kind of approach would you get if somebody wanted to eat better? They say used the tools, they found out foods that would be the best for them to eat, but maybe they're not eating that well right now. Would you just say just jump 2 feet in, or do you find from a psychological and sociological viewpoint that it's hard for them to kind of adhere to something or to stick to something longer term?
Yeah, I don't know. Some people have seen just follow the numbers and dive straight in, but I think most people need to progressively introduce, look, let's try a green veggie that I, haven't eaten any veggies forever, and let's learn to cook a meal at home. Let's try a high protein, high satiating breakfast. I think one step at a time, adding one new habit at a time is much more likely to be sustainable for the long term, which most people really need. So I definitely think we try to build incrementally new habits one upon another, sort of the James Clear sort of approach. I know you're a big fan of him, I am too, and definitely incremental improvement that then will make a lasting, sustainable habit that will get you through the rest of your life, and just that competition, and then you're going to binge and do an Eric Helms and be, some insane amount of weight heavier straight after the competition.
Yeah, I mean, working with people who don't, they're not bodybuilders necessarily, but they want to improve their body composition. Common knowledge isn't, always common practice, and most people in the world, or at least in the Western world, know that if they want to improve their health, improve their body composition, they probably got to eat better than what they're currently eating. But
yep.
There just seems to be a point where people just can't do it. They can't stick to it. They'll go all in. They'll try to cut out everything that they enjoy from their diet. They'll be very, very rigid. I was one of these as well, and they'll just focus only on nutrient density, but not focusing on calorie density. So you'll see that they're not losing weight. This is more difficult. I don't eat any of the foods I like anymore. I'm only eating, very unprocessed single ingredient foods, and I'm not losing any weight. What's the point? And then they end up not making any progress. One approach that I actually like to use with clients is I don't necessarily get them to track any, let's say, low calorie vegetables like green vegetables, these kind of things. And I find that works a little bit better, because when you cut calories from somebody, which may be necessary if they need to drop body fat, for a lot of people, that when you cut calories and you say, okay, well, you're eating less carbohydrates now, the first thing to go is usually vegetables, because they still want to eat those oats, they want to eat the rice, they want to enjoy their snack foods. So if you tell people that, okay, maybe don't track calorie or don't track your vegetables, but obviously still track to an extent your fruits and more starchy vegetables, they seem to just intake it a little bit more, because it's a free food. And then once they get this habit built up and they're able to consistently eat 3-5 plus servings of vegetables per day, then you could say, well, okay, progress has stalled here a little bit. Why don't we start tracking some of these foods a little bit more, or look at how much of these foods you're actually eating? When I say you don't track your vegetable intake, are you eating 47 heads of broccoli per day? And
Yeah, totally. We sort of take an approach of, here's a food list that you can start eating mostly off that food list. That'd be a great thing, and add more and more foods from that, and then here's some meals. But then ultimately we try to dial in nutrient density, which we can do quantitatively, and some people really want to do that and really thrive on that. Not everybody gets to that point, but if at that point you're doing the tracking for the sake of, let's make sure I'm getting enough magnesium from my diet and potassium from my diet, and which foods can I add to improve that. And you're not necessarily focusing on calories per se, but by focusing on calories, you really boost the satiety, and you'll naturally reduce your calorie intake. And then I suppose the last step, we've got a smart macros algorithm that then says, hey, you dial in your body fat, improve your lean body mass. Let's dial in your carbs and your fat and your protein. If you're losing too much muscle, you bring up your protein and bring down your fat and your carbs and sort of dial it in progressively. But not many people get to that micromanaged approach. I think probably your clientele, your audience might be the people who would get to that. But most mums and dads just want to, eat healthy foods that look colourful with their family and feel good about that and not be micromanaging it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I do try my best to move away from the approach with people who aren't necessarily doing like a bodybuilding competition or want to get extremely lean. And it's something that I'm actually working on at the moment, is a series of content on how to maintain single digit body fat, because people say that they want this, but when they realize what's actually involved in maintaining something like that, it starts to slowly become clear to them that, okay, maybe I don't want to be hungry a lot. Maybe I don't want to keep my activity levels up. Maybe I don't want to be eating the same at the same times and sleeping all the time. Maybe I don't want to not eat out every single day. So people often think that they want a certain thing, but in reality, they just really want to feel better. So the approach I do try to take with people who, and a lot of people I work with would be like, say, in corporate, etc., who have jobs, who need to be social, who want to drink out and drink alcohol out and enjoy foods out, and not necessarily be tracking everything or having that be quite restrictive. Because even with the flexible dieting approach, when people get too caught up in the if it fits your macros or flexible dieting and calorie tracking, I find that it becomes quite restrictive in itself, because if somebody doesn't know the exact macros of a food that they haven't cooked themselves, they won't eat it. And it's like, well, I'm following a flexible approach. It's like, yeah, you won't eat anything that you haven't cooked yourself or you don't know what the exact macros in. So it becomes quite restrictive in itself. But
there was a good post by Abel Sabai, I think his surname is, about what it takes to actually stay at that sub 10% body fat level for most people, and the level of sacrifice it takes to actually get 15%, 12%, 10%, 8% to actually sustain that. And as you say, it's incremental amounts of discipline that you have to put in more and more and more to the point it dominates your life. So you have to find, are you actually trying to stay at 6%, or you're trying to get down to that, or hey, you just want to be fit and healthy and avoid diabetes and be able to feel strong and healthy, which is probably where I'm at. That I'd like to be a whole lot leaner, but the sacrifices it takes as a dad and someone who's got a full-time job and a hobby that they love and needs to be able to think clearly and not be able to not always be flaky and needs to be able to think. Maybe that extreme approach is not for you. So you need to find that balance point, definitely. And if most of the time, if you're starting a day with higher protein, highly satiating foods, you're going to be, better controlled overall, and maybe be able to have those splurges with your friends or your family occasionally, and not have to be completely racked with guilt. Just go, yeah, I've got more energy for my workout tomorrow morning, and get back into it. You don't have to be, completely racked with guilt because you're not going to be on a stage in 2 months.
Yeah, I think everything in life is about a trade-off. I mean, it's like saying that I want to be really rich, or I want to be a professional NBA player, but I don't want to do any hard work. So who doesn't want that? But everything comes with pleasures and pains, I guess.
Yeah, the other thing, it's amazing to see like people like Eric Helms and now talking about intuitive eating and not being a slave to the calorie tracker all the time, and trying to listen to their body signals and train their body to just choose the foods. And I suppose that's the long-term goal, is to develop good habits that what foods are going to help you achieve your goals.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key. The thing you said there last is your habits, because we've kind of touched on everything here in this conversation, but 99.9% of the people in the world eat instinctively. And if we look at the Western developed world, most people do eat based off their hunger signals, but a lot of people are increasing their body fat, and there's a lot of obesity. So it's having the correct habits and learning quality nutrition, how to eat properly, how to what calories are, what macronutrients are, and I feel personally that you actually get that by going into a level of tracking for a while, because it teaches you about calorie density, teaches you about satiety, teaches you about protein, fiber, etc. And then when you start to eat instinctively, then you can actually manage your weight and be healthy. Because if you just tell somebody who's already probably eating instinctively but can't lose any body fat, oh, just eat, based off your intuition, they're like, well, I'm already doing that, I'm not dropping any weight, So
yeah, definitely.
You need to I feel you need to go and track for a while, or maybe do a bit more extra work and overreach yourself for a little while, and so you can learn and understand about nutrition, and then it's when you pull back. And that's the kind of approach that I feel works with a lot of people who even have these lifestyles like yourself, who want to be more flexible. They don't necessarily want to be overly lean, but by tracking for a while, and I'm sure you've tracked for a while before in the past,
totally.
It teaches you a lot about nutrition, and then you can pull back. So when I'm not doing a competition, I don't really like to track, because it's a mental drain sometimes, and I don't want to weigh my foods. I want to eat based off more off hunger, but I'm only able to not get extremely fat when I'm not competing by having tracked for so long, because I know know that, okay, that food is not 0 calories, it's probably 600 calories and probably has quite a bit of fat. And then maybe later in the day, if I eat a high fat breakfast, I'll maybe reduce my fat a little bit, not necessarily tracking it, but I'll reduce my fat a little bit so that my overall calories are probably in balance. I know protein, what food portions would have roughly how much protein, so I'll try get in multiple servings of that per day. And then, like, in the reverse, if I eat a high amount of carbs in the morning or after training, I might reduce it at other points of the day. And that way I wouldn't have known how to do that really unless I did some form of tracking. Not necessarily tracking macros, but maybe food control, portion control, these kind of things. And that's the kind of, I suppose, come full circle. And that's, I think, how people should do it long term. Because nobody wants to be, I always say this, nobody wants to be 65 and using MyFitnessPal with their grandkids,
I've got a 10,000 day streak. Ooh, I've got to keep it up. Yeah, definitely. Food tracking is like training wheels, and you can learn about your macros and calories. And also, I think, from my point of view, learning your macros and learning what foods you need to actually meet your micronutrient goals to get adequate and optimal is really powerful. And like you said, eventually you've learnt those habits and you can back off, and then you go, hey, I'm gaining more fat than I needed to or wanted to. I'll get back on the train, put the training wheels back on for a little while, and be a bit more disciplined. And
So finally, Marty, I wanted to touch on the topic of supplements versus food. So you're obviously pretty big on nutrient density and getting in a lot of good quality nutrition. But what are your thoughts on using supplements to aid that, or supplements in the diet in general, both for just general health and then sports performance?
Yeah, definitely. Supplements definitely have a role, but definitely they're just an addition, a supplement to top up. And I think really you need to get supplements from fresh foods. I'm diving into the micronutrients, and every micronutrient comes out and says degrades in the presence of heat and water and light and acid and base. So it's like the bottom line is you need fresh food, and the food off the grocery store shelves is built for longevity on the shelf and shelf stability and price, and doesn't contain those vitamins, so they've got to supplement them to fill in your folate or a few very narrow spectrum vitamins, but you're not going to necessarily get all the different vitamins and minerals you need from those fortified foods, even if they do say in the packet you've got a certain amount. And I mean, looking at folate, the folic acid that's in so many foods today doesn't give you the same effect of folate, and you end up with a lot of folic acid circulating in your bloodstream, and it masks the B12 deficiencies. And very few foods have got it supplemented with magnesium, potassium, and those sort of nutrients that we tend to really find hard to get in adequate quantities, just because they're really big. Your vitamin pill never contains your potassium and calcium and sodium that you need, because there's just so much bulk in those nutrients. So you're never going to really take those foods in adequate quantities without getting it in the food, just because you'd be downing pills and powders all day. So definitely prioritize fresh whole foods that contain those nutrients, and the more close they can come from nature, the better. The better the soil they're grown in, the more nutrients they're going to extract and put into the food and into yourself in a bioavailable form that you can use and your body knows what to do with. Because if you try to jam 15 grams of salt into yourself, or a whole lot of potassium and magnesium all at once, your gut just can't absorb it, and it's going to flush it out straight away. You're going to want to throw up or sit on the toilet for half an hour until you get rid of it, and your body just doesn't deal with those supplements that you really need, especially those minerals in large quantities. So you really need to prioritize getting it from food and just topping up and supplementing where you need to.
Yeah, I think I have a similar approach. I obviously spent a lot of money when I was younger on supplements because I was naive. But recently, or I suppose over the last couple of years, I've been really using supplementation just to get some omegas, because I may not have, may not be eating fish enough per week, purely just for, I'm not really a huge fan of the taste of it, but I still do eat it a couple times a week. I'll supplement with magnesium citrate, as you mentioned. It's kind of hard to get in your diet. And then a few other like adaptogens, so things that you may not necessarily get through your diet. Like I had a coffee, we start recording at 7, and I had a coffee with some L-theanine, which I actually really like the combination of the two. Takes the edge, and it's not something I'd really get in a huge quantity in my diet unless I'm shoveling back like liters and liters of tea, where I can get a pretty cheap dose, and it's pretty safe amino acid, and that's really all that I use for supplementation. Obviously, sports supplements like creatine, I'm not going to be eating enough red meat per week to get in enough creatine. Other things like caffeine, but your basic supplements is really all that you need.
Yeah, definitely. I've just been, I saw you on Instagram, you're talking about 5-HTP and improvements in appetite and sleep because it boosts your serotonin, and 5-HTP comes from adequate tryptophan, and that works synergistically with all these other different vitamins that help you sleep and improve your appetite, and therefore you're not going to be craving and hungry and tired all the time and looking for junk food and carbohydrates. So, all these nutrients work synergistically together from whole foods. So you've got to prioritize that first, and the Soylent and all these fake food sort of products, but you never hear of anybody going, oh, all I ate was Soylent, look at me, I'm ripped and I look amazing and I'm really healthy and living forever. It's the people who learn to eat real food, that was recently in touch with the ground in some form, that tend to thrive and do the best.
That's true. So it's really just an overall approach, just eating better and focusing on just better quality nutrition. Supplements aren't really going to do much. You did talk with 5-HTP, actually. I ran out of that. It's something that I really like. It's for the mood. I find that my mood is a little bit better, obviously, because of that increase in serotonin. But there's some research that I was looking into that when consumed with food, it actually gives you a better satiety response. It doesn't fill you up necessarily, but you just seem to be more satisfied. So it's actually a pretty good tool potentially for people who are dieting. You can't actually buy it in Ireland. It's just it's regulated, but I go to the UK quite frequently, so next week I'm going to get some again. Well, Marty, thanks so much for coming on the call today. We're just coming up on time. So any final thoughts or recommendations? If I asked you what are your 3 or 4 tips for somebody who wants to optimize their nutrition, optimize their health, what would that be?
Yeah, I suppose learn about the micronutrients in your food, and we've got a tool, Nutrient Optimizer. You can do a free report to work out your micronutrient and macronutrient targets, and it gives you a short list of foods and meals you can try. Get you started on the journey. We've got Optimizing Nutrition as well, which is where I'll do all my long form blog posts if you want to dive into a systematized engineer type approach to nutrition, which I enjoy, and it's really cool to have a number of other people follow along, and people that I respect enjoy that at least, and that's really fun. And yeah, love to connect with people online, and it's really been fun to chat to you, Adam, today.
So there you have it, guys. That was a very interesting conversation with Marty, and we talked about things that people don't often think about when they think about their nutrition. They'll just look at calories and think it's just calories in versus calories out, but they'll often overlook things like satiety index or insulin index. And although insulin index may not be as important for your everyday person, if you're somebody who has diabetes, or you're overweight and obese, or you just have poor blood sugar management, potentially insulin index is something that you may want to look at. And it's definitely some food for thought for me as well. And if you want to learn more about Marty and his work, head over to optimizingnutrition.com. You can also join Marty's Facebook group, which there's thousands of people in there, and he posts in there pretty much every day with really good content, and that's in the show notes or the show description. And please do share this podcast if you found it useful with other people. You can tag me in your stories or whatever it is with my Instagram handle. It's at AdamMac192, and I'd really appreciate some feedback, and of course a review for the algorithm as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the next show.